Welcome, everybody, and good afternoon on this wonderful Taco Tuesday. I'm Jessica. I am the Director of School Climate Leadership and Instructional Services at the Santa Clara County Office of Education and a very proud member of the core leadership team of California PBIS. I'll be starting us off as we talk about California PBIS recognition. We also have a few other exciting things going on in the great state of California and with our continuing and growing implementation of PBIS behavior interventions and support. Next slide, please. It wouldn't be PBIS if we didn't talk about our expectations for today. We are responsible, we are respectful, and we are awesome. So today we are here to talk about how we can celebrate your hard work and enjoy the recognition process and be inspired by the work of our PBIS community. Next slide. So we have some recognition resources for you. We have the following hyperlink resources for you for reference after the webinar. These resources will be available by clicking the recognition resource link or by visiting California PBIS website at pbisca.org, apply for recognition. Next slide. Because today is a webinar, we won't have a camera or a mic for participants, but feel free to use the Q&A feature as we do have a monitor, a host who's in that room hosting the Q&A questions. We will be recording and the slides will be accessible to you tomorrow. Next slide. So we're going to go over briefly our agenda for today. We will be providing you with an overview of the California group of PBIS regional leads and support. For those of you not familiar, we're going to give you an introduction and some data to ground us in the rationale of the why of our recognition system. We're going to go over timelines and applications for recognition, and we'll go through step by step the various level and a couple of criteria items. We will wrap on resources and lead contacts in your region. Next slide. Before we get started, I want to make sure that everybody is familiar with the acronyms that we are sure to use. We all know that education is alphabet soup. Starting with SWPBIS stands for school-wide PBIS, and ACER is an authorized California PBIS external reviewer. ODR, we're talking about your office discipline referrals. What we wanted to explain was the difference between a BIP or a BIP and a BSP, a behavior support plan. When districts use both terms, they will actually reserve BIP for the document created after a formal functional behavior assessment, that FBA, and use BSP for any behavior support plan that is created more informally. Different from the BIP or the behavior intervention plan, a behavior support plan is much more general and is not a legal document. Therefore, a BSP is a guide to managing behaviors rather than a fully developed plan of action. The BIP or behavior intervention plan and behavior plan are terms often used in the field of education psychology, particularly when working with individuals who exhibit challenging or contextually inappropriate behavior. While terms are sometimes used interchangeably, they can have distinct meanings depending on the context. So a behavior intervention plan is a formalized plan developed to address and modify specific contextually inappropriate or challenging behaviors. It's typically created in response to a person consistently behaving and engaging in behaviors that interfere with their learning or the learning of others. BIPs are often associated with individuals who have disability or special education needs. You'll see them written into IEPs. The BSP is a broader term that encompasses a range of strategies and supports designed to promote positive behavior and prevent the occurrence of challenging behaviors. Unlike a BIP, a BSP may be implemented for individuals who do not necessarily have a history of significant challenging behaviors, but may benefit from additional support to maintain positive behavior. In summary, a behavior intervention plan is a specific and targeted plan developed in response to existing behaviors, while a behavior support plan is a more comprehensive approach aimed at promoting positive behaviors and preventing the development of challenging behaviors. So that's a little bit on our acronym. And now we're going to hear from Luke.
Thank you, Jess. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Luke Anderson. I'm the Executive Director for Prevention Supports and Services at Placer County Office of Education. I'm just going to share a quick little bit about California PBIS. California PBIS was originally formed in 2012, then called the California PBIS Coalition. And we are dedicated to providing a standard of practice for PBIS through work that our technical assistance centers across the state provide. We do emphasize systematic implementation of PBIS. So if you're working with one of our TA centers, you'll notice that we rely on implementation science, and we do a deep dive into PBIS. All right, next slide. A couple data points we want to share. So one thing that we're really proud of at California PBIS is our implementation reach. So pre-pandemic, over 3,000 schools in California were actively reporting PBIS data to the Center on PBIS. We, like many education initiatives, took a slight dip after the pandemic, but now we're well over 2,700 schools actively implementing PBIS across the state. So that's 1 in 4 schools that are using our PBIS tools. All right, next slide. So the next question we ask is, are those schools implementing with fidelity? These are our year-over-year data for fidelity as measured on the tiered fidelity inventory. You can see tier 1 at the bottom, tier 2 in the middle, and tier 3 at the top. And this last school year, tier 1 was at 80% fidelity on average across California. Tier 2 is at about that same level. And even tier 3, we were at 78% fidelity. And so, of course, then the last question that we have to ask is, does this actually result in improved student outcomes? And we'll go ahead and go to the next slide here. And we're lucky in California, we have at least 3 peer-reviewed journals from our colleagues at University of Florida and Wested now that examined schools implementing PBIS in California, so using those data we just showed. And in each of these, we see that schools that are implementing PBIS have statistically significant improved outcomes when compared to similar schools. Very cool. Neat thing about 2 of these studies, we actually used recognition data to complete. So by participating in recognition, you're helping us advance research in California on PBIS. All right, next slide. Also, we've been fortunate to see year-over-year growth in recognition. Last year, we had the most schools apply for and be awarded recognition ever in California. I'll ask Denise just to hit one quick animation here. So last year, we had 1,700 schools. So that's 1 in 6 schools in California are voluntarily participating in statewide California PBIS recognition. All right, next slide. All right, so how do we pull this off? So I just wanted to give a quick shout out to the California PBIS recognition team. The folks you see with the stars by their pictures are presenters on today's webinar, so you'll get to see us. But behind the scenes, it takes all these folks working to pull this off. And then, of course, their colleagues back at their offices as well, especially when it comes to scoring. So big thank you to our colleagues across the state for supporting this work. Of course, a big thank you to you, those folks out there at the schools and districts that support this process as well. All right, so when you're applying, we do want folks to center on the why of this process. So by applying for recognition, we're hoping that schools and districts have an opportunity to reflect on their PBIS implementation and celebrate their progress towards sustaining school-wide PBIS. This process also helps us identify exemplar schools throughout the state. So we do get schools that reach out and say, hey, we're interested in going and visiting a school site that's implementing PBIS well. And we look to this list of schools to help make those connections. All right, next slide. All right, so what happens when schools apply for recognition? We do send a congratulatory email. We provide the decals that you probably know. We provide those electronically. We also have some recommendations if you're ever interested into organizations that will print those for you. We recommend that you post them in your building, of course. We will prominently display your name on our website, and then we'll also do an acknowledgement of all schools at our conference in Sacramento. You can see there are new emblems. All right, timeline. All right, today is January 30th. We are, in fact, doing our introductory webinar today. The application window will open today, so sometime before midnight, you'll actually be able to click and apply. You'll see between now and next week, we will be fully fleshing out all of those resource documents that Jess mentioned earlier. So the things like all of the videos that correspond to each criteria, and then of course the recognition worksheets that we know are used quite heavily. Recognition closes on May 10th. We have moved it up a little bit from previous years. That allows us enough time to score recognition. And then there are certain instances where we can reach out to schools and districts to get additional information. So that May 10th date allows us to do that. Notifications will be sent out no later than the second week of September. And we'll hope to see you at the California PBIS conference on October 9th in Sacramento. All right, how to prepare. All resources are available at pbisca.org. There is an applying for recognition tab. I encourage you to use that. That's where all resources and the link to register are located. Every school that applies for recognition is required to use an authorized California PBIS external reviewer, an ACER. And we're going to want that ACER to be an active participant in the process. That ACER is that external reviewer that helps schools really get the most out of recognition. That ACER will sit with you through the TFI and also be engaged in the walkthrough process. So really important that you identify that person or you become one if you're interested. Information on the ACER is available at our website as well. All right, next slide. All right, let's get into the meat of the webinar. Raf is going to drop in the chat the updated 2024 California PBIS recognition system criteria at a glance document. We made a little change to how we're doing this webinar because a lot of the criteria have not changed and schools are generally pretty fluent with them. We're not going to take a deep dive into every criteria. Instead, we're going to spend a little bit of time on some of the ones you're familiar with, and then we'll stretch out and dive a little bit deeper on any new criteria or any criteria that have been maybe problematic in the past. Our goal is for schools to really know what they're applying for, and we want every school to apply for the level that they have earned. So that's part of our work, and that's why I made some changes. So I'm going to encourage you to click on that link in the chat. That'll give you that document. And that'll make this process probably a little bit more meaningful for you as well. So I'll just pause real quick while you do that. And you may want to just tuck that away, or if you've got two screens like I'm lucky enough to have, maybe put the webinar on one screen and that document on another. All right, I said a quick moment and I meant it. We're moving on. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right, recognition criteria number one. So this item, I believe, has been the same since the very beginning of recognition. This is the item where for each level of recognition, you need to have achieved a particular tiered fidelity inventory score. Again, I'm not going to go through all those because they are referenced in that criteria at a glance document. You can look at that and see what level do you need. As you go from bronze to platinum, of course, our expectations on those levels do kind of crank up, if you will. You'll notice down at the bottom, there will be links on these slides to a short video that goes into detail. Again, we'll have all those updated by next week. It takes a little bit of cross-referencing. All right. So importantly, so your school must complete that TFI this school year, and you must enter that into PBIS assessments at pbisapps.org. If your school is not familiar with PBIS assessments, we're going to encourage you to reach out to your regional technical assistance center and they can help you get set up with that. There is no cost for using PBIS assessments at pbisapps.org. There's just a few steps to kind of get set up with that. So your school is going to complete the TFI this school year. You're going to complete it with your ACER. And your ACER must have completed that ACER certification either in the 2020-21 school year, the 21-22 school year, the 22-23 school year, or this school year. And that ACER must have completed that certification before the TFI is completed for recognition. The whole point of the ACER training is to make sure that the ACER has sufficient background in the tiered fidelity inventory and can be as helpful as possible for you. So,
Luke,
yeah.
Can I pause you 1 second? There's a bunch of people asking for a link. The chat's disabled for our, okay. Is it going through now? Yep. Okay. It's going through. Thank you. We fixed it.
Awesome. Thanks, Jenny. Thanks for jumping in too. Let's make sure we get folks what they need here. So the chat should be going. Again, you cannot chat to everybody, but we can throw things out there and use that Q&A feature too. All right. So those are the important things on that. Again, the specific criteria are referenced in that document, which will also be available no later than tomorrow. So that criteria at a glance document will be up on our website. All right, let's go to the next one here. All right, criteria 2. This one has also been fairly consistent year to year. Criteria 2, we ask that schools provide current year major office discipline referral data. So what that means is we want you to tell us how many, or excuse me, the percentage of students that fall within in particular groups of office discipline referrals. So how many had 0 to 1, 2 to 5, and 6+. All right, again, this one hasn't changed much. Pretty straightforward. I'll have Denise click us to the next slide here, and I'll tell you a couple of things that you do want to pay attention to. This criteria, criteria 2, is the criteria that historically has resulted in the most recognition errors by schools. And the most common error is as schools are counting up the number of students or the percentage of students that have received 0 to 1 referrals, they forget to include students with 0 referrals. And so then they'll provide data that is incomplete. So you want to report, excuse me, the number of students with 0 to 1, with 2 to 5, and with 6 or more. In gold and platinum, there are specific criteria. So it's not just reporting them. You actually have to have your students fall within a particular grouping. So you're going to want to read again the criteria at a glance document, and it will tell you what those are. All right, let's go to the next slide. So a couple resources we wanted to point out here. One, if you're following along, or when you get these slides tomorrow, Swiss users, that up there is a link to a screencast that tells you how to quickly access those data if your school uses the school-wide information system or Swiss. If your school does not use Swiss, we're going to encourage you to find some online resources. We have one linked there for non-Swiss users. But we also are going to encourage you to reach out to your regional technical assistance center, and we'll talk about how to access those folks before the end of this webinar. All right, next slide. All right, we are piloting a new item this year. Here's the thing with a pilot item. Do you have to complete the pilot item? Yes. Will it be scored? No. Okay, so no school will not get recognition because they missed part of this item, but we do want you to complete it because we want to see how schools do, see if this is a usable item that we might add. The pilot item does require schools to disaggregate their discipline data. And by disaggregate, what we mean is we want you to not only be able to tell us how many students maybe have a referral at your school, but how many students in each particular student group that you might be interested in. So we'll talk about some different student groups that you might disaggregate by. All right, let's go and click to the next slide. All right, so this one has multiple parts. So the first question you're going to see in the pilot item is going to ask pilot item A, does your school have the capacity to disaggregate suspension or office discipline referral data based on student group? For example, students with disabilities. So could you in a meeting figure out what percentage of students with disabilities have an office discipline referral or suspension, and what percentage of students without disabilities have an office discipline or suspension? That's what we're asking. If you don't know what we're talking about, or you don't have that capacity, we have a short online module that will have you click through. It takes about 10 minutes to complete. We'll have one person from your team do that, just so we can kind of begin to stretch your understanding around this item. All right, let's go to the next part. If you are able to disaggregate, we're also going to ask you which student groups can you disaggregate by. So for example, can you disaggregate by race and ethnicity? Can you disaggregate by IEP status, English learner status? Can you disaggregate by gender? So we'll ask that question, and if you know it, then we'll have you answer it. And then lastly, in this item, we're going to ask you, does disproportionate discipline exist? So are some of these student groups being overrepresented in your discipline data? So going back again to our students with disabilities example, if 40% of your students in general have received a office discipline referral, we would expect that number to be the same for your students with disabilities. We'd also expect that to be the same across race and ethnicity. So if we see one of those that's overrepresented, and we just want to know which group that is, we're not going to report those data out by school. We just want to get a sense on what's happening out there in schools. Again, pilot item, you have to do it, but you won't miss out on recognition if you struggle with it. Don't worry about that. All right, let's go on to the next one, and I am going to hand it over to Denise.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Denise Granger, PBIS coordinator at the Riverside County Office of Ed. And I'd love to tell you a little bit about criteria 3 and 4, because they're pretty well connected. So criteria 3 is new within the last couple of years. It's been updated, and really the intent is to add on layers of equity and mental health to our PBIS work. So you'll see in the criteria that all levels, so whether you're applying for bronze, silver, gold, or platinum, will want you to, and you and your team, to review both of these resources. So one of the fact sheets, one of the ISF fact sheets, and at least one of the other documents that are linked down below. So you'll be able to tell us which ones your team reviewed when you actually submit your application. But then if you're applying for gold or platinum, we also want you to explore the integrated TFI companion guide, which we can drop a link for you in the chat there as well. But that particular companion guide is linked directly to criteria 4. So that will provide your ability to choose an area to prioritize and then create a goal for in criteria 4. So for example, here's the TFI companion guide. And if we look at item 1.1, team composition, and we look in the elaboration section, we can see that there's information reminding us that our team should represent our community demographics. And we should have folks on the team with mental health and trauma expertise and applied behavior expertise. So again, we're making sure that those kinds of people are on our team, because then if you choose that item to work on in criteria 4, then you'll be creating an action plan. So this was one of the most commonly missed items on last year's application, because we want to make sure that you provide plenty of details when it comes to your action plan. So really what you're doing, again, for bronze and silver, you're reporting one item that you plan to improve, one item from tier 1 TFI that you plan to improve, and you've got to give us an action step. But then for gold and silver, you're reporting one item. I'm sorry, for gold, you're reporting one item from tier 1 and tier 2 or tier 3, whereas for platinum, you're reporting for all 3 tiers. And the add here is, though, you're not just reporting which item you're working on, you're also giving us details on your action plan or steps. So again, we'll want you to use the action steps or reflect the work that's in the TFI companion guide in your action steps. So again, this was the space where we saw the most errors last year, was not connecting item 3 or criteria 3 and 4 in your answers, and then not giving enough detail in your action steps in number 4. So for example, again, here's information from the TFI companion guide. And if we choose that we want to change the makeup of our team, improve the makeup of our team, like we notice we don't have family members represented, or we don't have classified staff who have knowledge of the operation of the school represented, then we could create the goal of, if you see here, example 1, our tier 1 team will expand our operating procedures to address feature 1.1. Our team lead will invite a classified staff representative to tier 1 meetings and recruit multiple parents by June 1st, 2024. So you're directly linking back to what is in the TFI item, so that those two, again, criteria 3 and 4 are directly linked together, and you're giving us specific information on when and how you plan to accomplish that goal. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Raf for criteria 5.
Howdy, y'all. Good afternoon. Rafael Rodriguez Jr., Program Manager of Social Emotional Sports with Placer County, aka Captain PBIS for the folks in the know. All right. Criteria number 5 is going to be focusing on advanced tiered intervention data. And so from, it skipped. We can move that back to the second one. Okay, there you go. Perfect. Thank you. All right. So this, a often missed item for this criteria focuses on what a tier 3 intervention is. And so we are asking you to go back to the PBIS website and using the tier 3 guidance tool that's found on pbis.org. And it's a streamlined method to analyze your advanced tiered intervention system. And so this guide focuses on, we have it there branched out to your district, school, and student level systems that you should consider when discussing or implementing your tier 3 intervention. Next slide. So within that guide, you'll find a multitude of tools to assist you with the 4 key practices that drive those tier 3 interventions: the FBA, wraparound, person-centered planning, cultural and contextual fits. And you'll see that there are a multitude of resources that you could research to get more informed process for your tier 3 intervention. So we'll look at some of the examples on the next slide here. One more. Okay, there you go. So tier 2 example, we tried and true, check in, check out. We're discussing how your progress monitoring is occurring, how many students are participating, and the area where we find the most mistakes or most errors are not including the number of students who are participating and the percentage of students that have met the goal and are transferring out. And then for tier 3, here it is, same situation. What intervention are you using? And then what progress monitoring are we going to have? Thank you. The next slide here, some non-examples where we are using interventions that do not align themselves properly with a tier 3 intervention, just as Jess mentioned earlier, where we're talking about the BIP and the BSP. We've had schools that are mentioning these processes, but they're not directly aligned with the key practices that are found in the guide that I mentioned earlier, which all of these links will be hyperlinked in the deck when you receive them. So here are some non-examples where we're reteaching behavior expectations. 2 students participated. This is not a tier 2 intervention. Same thing for tier 3. We're talking with an administrator, conversations, and now we have 20% improvement out of 100. it's not specific enough. We do not have enough criteria to support this, and then we'll ask questions to clarify what you're discussing. Thank you. Next slide here. Now we'll move on to criteria 6, where this revolves around how the implementation of PBIS practices directly impacts academic improvement. Slide on down. The key area where we have the most errors stem from not including the pre and post data. So we want the pre and post assessment data included. We've changed the way their question is phrased so that we have those separated out. So we won't, hopefully this time around, we're not going to have that same mistake. It's crucial. This is crucial to this criteria because we want to really see how your PBIS practices are aligning with academics and how one supports the other. So you can see the examples and non-examples that are listed. Here we have one example where we have iReady is the system used. We have the correctly identified group with our English language learners, 5th grade students, or we're tracking. We can see here where it clearly says it's decreased from 40% down to 25%. And then there's a brief rationale as to how PBIS helped those students access the academics. So a nice little narrative at the end. So again, we're not asking you for a long, lengthy narrative. Of course, my little wink, wink, my gold and platinum folks, like that's where the rigor increases as we start moving up the medals. So as long as we are concise and we are clear with how this process works, then you should be successful. Slide on down. All right, criteria 7. So included with the TFI, we are also requesting that that walkthrough tool is beneficial to identifying the true fidelity of your site's PBIS implementation. There are walkthrough tools that are highly recommended for you to use, and we suggest you to use directly off of the brief here for supporting and responding to student social, emotional, and behavioral needs. Again, all of these items will be linked in the deck. Let's slide on down to the next slide here. So from the criteria tools, this is one of them that you will be able to access. The brief will be linked into this deck for you. Please look this over carefully when you are listing the practices that you are observing in your classroom. There's clearly delineated section for you to describe that. Be concise, be clear with that so that we can gain a better understanding of how you are utilizing this tool. The next slide here has the updated version of the evidence-based classroom practices in the physical and/or virtual setting. All right, and so one more time here. So here's an example narrative where we were talking about meeting with your team, what assessments you're using, and/or some interviews with your students. Next slide. Here is the classroom walkthrough tool that I mentioned. This has it has been updated. If you look on this briefing page 10, it'll all be hyperlinked. Don't trust me. You're going to find all the matrices of practices across multiple settings and student needs. Just know if you directly correlate your response from this document, you got it, folks. So we're trying to make this as easy and as streamlined as possible. So any questions, just please reach out. All right. And now I'm going to pass this along to Jenny. Take it away.
Okay, I was mid-response
Alright.
with somebody, so sorry, whoever just asked me a question, I gave you a half answer.
No.
But feel free to repost it and and somebody will respond to you, so I apologize.
No worries. One more slide. There you go. Thank you.
Okay, so a lot of people have been asking specific questions about their area. This is a perfect place to go to figure out who is your region lead. And so this is posted on our website. If you go to our website, this is a live map, and if you hover over, so I'm in Region 9 in Orange County. I'm Ginny Joseph, coordinator here and also part of the California leadership team. But if you hovered over Region 9 on this map, it would pop up that my name and then also contact from San Diego County Office of Ed that also helps lead our region. The contact from that office would also come up. So if you have any specific questions, I'd highly recommend first reaching out to your region lead contact, or if you have a district level support, that would be a really good person to start with. Next slide. Common pitfalls. So we've been doing this for a while, and there are always some patterns in the responses that we see. Make sure that you review your application. That's why we provide those worksheets to so that you can fully flesh out all your answers, have a couple people read them over. A lot of times I encourage schools in our area to have other people, like their TOSA, sometimes they'll email a response to myself or somebody else in our office that's really familiar with the process to know if the answer is sufficient. So review it and get somebody to preview your or proofread your application before you turn it in. Incomplete answers, we want you to be as succinct as possible, but make sure it's clear, completes the response to each item, and that we can understand it. Again, another good reason to have a proofreader read through your responses and make sure that it makes sense and answers the question. One of the main, I think I've already answered this question in the Q&A today. Be sure to write a solution to the TFI item you identify. That's one of the common errors that we see. For the Tier 1 TFI action plan item, make sure you're incorporating that mental health or equity component this year. And then just make sure that it makes sense. Again, having a buddy that really knows the system here to proofread will help you out a lot. Next slide, please. Okay, another great resource if you have a question, if it's something that's popping up a lot, it's usually in the FAQ. We update these when we notice there are questions that keep getting asked over and over again. We'll put it in the FAQ, so your answer might already be on our website on the state recognition page. You'll find the FAQs. Next slide, please. Another lovely resource coming soon is we're going to offer some ACER office hours. We'll be posting those and messaging those out for you all. So if you're an ACER and you have some questions about that, feel free to attend these open office hours. So stay tuned for those. Next slide. Also, next slide, please. Wanted to mention a collaboration between California MTSS and California PBIS called the California Integrated Supports Project. If you're looking to find out what that might be about, please contact your region lead. Next slide, please. Oh, and this is what it's all about. The focus of the work is basically on quality professional development. It's about incorporating and integrating culturally relevant and sustaining practices and trauma-informed practices and screening practices. So it's a really exciting project, and it's going to be offered. We're recruiting schools for next year still, and we have schools that are going through the project this year as well. If you're interested and want to be connected to somebody in your region, please reach out. Next slide, please. Let's see. Yep. Okay, so this is a save the date coming up March 14th from 1 to 2:30 Pacific time. I think we're all in Pacific time. We are hosting our second Coaches Network. We did one earlier in the fall, and it was a really big success. This is intended for district and school level personnel with PBIS coaching responsibilities. It really is just an open session to come and talk about various topics, and the topics for March 14th are listed here, aligning with the lens of UDL, classroom management, conducting the TFI, first year coach, recognition Q&A, there it is, and redesigning school-wide expectations, you'll have the opportunity during the Coaches Network to rotate 2 of those topics, or you can stay in the same topic the whole time. So it was really fun last time. If you're interested in registering, take a picture of that dinosaur QR code up there, and then also watch your email, and social media will be advertising for this as well. And of course, our annual California PBIS conference coming up October 9th, 10th, and 11th. So save the date for that one. We're super excited to see you again in October. And I think with that, I think we've finished kind of in record time. So we'd like to open it to questions. I think we can turn it over to the chat. I think, Ralph, there were a couple that you tagged that you wanted to answer in live time, if you wanted to come back on, or unless you already addressed those while you were chatting.
I think I covered them. The primary one was the rationale behind
Perfect.
recognition, and really it's just to celebrate all the work that you are doing. So like who else, like this gives you an opportunity to review the work that you've done. We try to make this process as simple as possible. We're not reinventing the wheel. Just if your work, so I'm answering a question here around, I think that they're talking about an action plan, but all the work that you're doing while you're creating your action plan is just copy and paste it over into the application process. We're not asking you to recreate something, just use the existing practices and slide that over. And this allows you, while taking your TFI, to kind of align yourself up to determine which medal that your school qualifies for. Hopefully that answered that question.
Okay, so there's some more questions coming in through the chat. How long does it take to go through the ACER certification? I believe the video is about 30 minutes and the quiz is 10 questions. So, I mean, I'd give yourself an hour. Let's see, ACER office hours will be coming soon. We don't have those scheduled yet, but they will be coming soon. More information about the walkthrough. Is it scheduled? How long does it take? There's 2 pieces to the walkthrough. The one piece that you have to do is tied in with the Tier 1 TFI. And that is it's a part of the tiered fidelity inventory assessment. That's not us. That is coming from the tool itself. And so that piece is, talking to 15 students, talking to 10 or so staff. And so it just depends on what the timing is for getting access to those folks. Personally, I like to show up during recess and lunch and capture those folks so not to be disruptive to instruction. If anybody else wants to pipe in and talk about the TFI walkthrough part and how you might do that differently, just go ahead. Luke, you have something to say?
Yeah, I was going to unmute and just address some of the Tier 3 questions too. And Ginny, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on this. So there's been several questions around.
Wait, can I just answer part 2 of the walkthrough? So there's the TFI walkthrough part, but there's also a classroom walkthrough part. And the classroom walkthrough part is our piece. That has nothing to do with the tiered fidelity inventory. That's strictly attached to recognition. And so what we would like people to do is, depending on what the school is applying for, then that narrates how many classes and how intensely you have to go through and look for things. So so for bronze and silver, I'm doing this off the top of my head, bronze and silver, it's just asking like, hey, did your ACER go through some classrooms and check out what we're doing? Which you probably did while you were there. You've been through some of their classrooms. And then for gold and platinum, it gets a little bit more intense, where they're asking that you go look at a certain percentage of classrooms and note that a certain number of evidence-based practices are in place. And so that's why we created the classroom walkthrough tool, so that you can kind of take notes. And I like to provide the feedback to the school team if I am doing that for them. So it can take, half a day to get the TFI walkthrough piece and the classroom walkthrough piece. So it is a big chunk of time. So make sure you're equipped for that. So Luke, I'll turn it over to you for the tier 3 stuff.
Thanks, Jenny. By the way, thanks for the great detail on those walkthrough tools. So there were several questions around the tier 3 portion of the TFI and the requirement to review individualized behavior plans. So there was questions regarding if you could use a BSP or a BIP developed for a student with an IEP as those plans. So technically you can use those plans when you're reviewing when you're completing the tier 3 TFI. But one thing to keep in mind, if your tier 3 system is built solely around serving students with IEPs and is not connected to your PBIS or your larger MTSS system, it's likely that your school is going to really struggle with that item, because a lot of that item is about building those systems to efficiently and effectively deploy those interventions. So yes, you can use those plans as you're completing the tier 3 TFI. But if the only process you have for serving students with individualized needs is through the IEP process, you're probably going to find that the tier 3 TFI includes quite a few items that you haven't started yet, which is okay. Just kind of be prepared for that. So I wanted to address that. And panel, any other thoughts on that? Feel free to jump in. There's a question too around if the item requiring the disaggregation of data will become required. We don't know that yet. Part of what we're going to do is review the responses from the pilot item. But in general, I think the folks across California PBIS and then our partners at the Center on PBIS would certainly recommend that schools have that capability. You want to know not only is PBIS effective in general, but are all student groups benefiting from those systems you're putting in place, and being able to disaggregate or kind of split up your data is going to help you achieve that.
There's a question in the chat about tier 1 and tier 2, 3 walkthroughs being done on separate days. There's not a tier 2 or tier 3 walkthrough. I think maybe the question is referring to the TFI. So you can take the tier 1, the tier 2, or the tier 3 tiered fidelity inventory. And so maybe the question is more, can you do those on different days? And yes, of course, you can do those on different days. You don't have to do them all the same day. So hopefully that was the question.
Looks like there was a question too around, do schools need to apply every year? Yes, California PBIS recognition is a yearly process. So if a school applied last year and was gold, and they want to apply for that gold level again this year, then they would need to reapply. They're only 1 year long. And we really encourage schools to apply for the level that you feel like you have met, but really dig into those criteria. We want to make sure that the recognition process is accurate and consistent.
There's a really good question about wondering if a school-wide survey can be put out for the student feedback piece. There's actually a student input survey that PBIS Apps has for free on PBIS assessment. So if you're looking for more student voice, I would highly recommend that. It's the, oh gosh, what is it called now? I'll think of it. I'll find out, maybe we can put it in the chat. But the tiered fidelity inventory, the purpose of that walkthrough is to get random students' voice. It's actually really powerful if you've ever done it and walked through a school and had the opportunity to talk to students and get their feedback. And what we recommend is, and I believe this is on the expanded version of the TFI or the TFI companion guide, the additional questions, if somebody knows what I'm referring to. I don't want to mislead people, but it's basically asking that you get, different grade levels. I try to get different genders, different and when I'm talking to teachers, if you're in a middle or high school, make sure you're talking to different department leads and support staff across the school so that you're getting varied voices. If you do the school-wide survey, I'm not sure how you would pick and choose from the survey which responses you would then put in the TFI and use towards your answer. So yes, thank you. The feedback and input survey, I knew it was FIS and I couldn't remember what it stood for. So thank you. Somebody put that in the chat. But excellent question. Just to clarify, the ACER can come from your school site, but it's preferred, not required, to be someone outside of your school site. Actually, no, it does need to be an outside person. So flip that and reverse it. The ACER is external to your school site. Is there an opportunity for a practice walkthrough to gauge readiness or level of recognition to apply for? I think you would, you can definitely do a trial run in terms of the TFI. If I think there was another question on how often do you take the TFI or how often is it recommended? So you can definitely take the TFI as a practice and then take another one before it closes. And of course, if you've got somebody that can do a walkthrough for you more than once, then that's fantastic. A list of deadlines for each step or tier. I'm wondering if you're asking about recommended, like to pace yourself. I mean, our final turn-in date is May 10th at midnight. So definitely pace yourself, especially if you have multiple school sites. But I would definitely, if you haven't done this before and you're supporting multiple schools, reach out to your region lead and they can help you with that.
There's another ACER question around if the ACER has to be external to the organization. The ACER should be external to the school site, but a district person can fill that role. So just kind of add that one bit of clarification on that. So if you have a TOSA or an MTSS coordinator, or even a PBIS team lead from another school site, we've had schools do that as well.
Okay, does anybody else on the panel see a question that hasn't been answered? I do see a question about the new expanded version of the TFI. It is not published yet. They're still testing it. So it's not out yet. Please answer the question about the case managers and people who are not part of the IEP team reviewing the BIP.
I wonder if that's regarding confidentiality. So for any BIP or tier 3 plan, it doesn't have to be a BIP that was reviewed. If the team's reviewing it, we would recommend that you, of course, black out student information. So that would be our recommendation in California. Of course, across the country, if somebody at the school site that's a school employee has an educational need to review that BIP, that is allowable. But I'd work with your school sites on what your process is for that.
There was a question around debates about, it looks like the TFI items. Looking for a forum or resource to explain it. I don't know if that person could repost a question to clarify what you're asking. Please.
Yeah, and I think with any specific questions like that, I would lean on your region support as well. Or any district level. I don't know, maybe you are district level or county level support. They might be able to help clarify any of the TFI questions.
There was one question that I think might be good for the whole group. Someone asked, if you enter your information in the application, will it save over time? It won't. It's a Google form. So you don't want to like actually put your information into the form until you're ready to go. But that's why we have for you at every level what we call a worksheet, which has every single question broken out and places for you to save your information. So those will be available on the website by the end of the week. So we recommend you save one of those and gather all your information, save it into that Google Doc or Word document. And once you have everything gathered and ready, you can then just copy paste into the Google form.
Also, we'll have the most current list of the ACERs. So if you don't see your name on the list and you took it in the last couple of weeks or even the last month, please be patient. We'll post it on Monday. And if you're still not on the list, then go ahead and reach out to us. Folks are wondering where to find the slides and recording.
The slides and the recording will be posted at pbisca.org. The slides actually, I think, may be available today. The recording won't be available until tomorrow at the earliest. All of the resources we went over today will also be at the recognition website at pbisca.org. So check that out. You have to go there to apply. That's where all your resources are going to be. It's one-stop shop.
Somebody did say that the ACER assessment was broken, which is interesting. I thought we just fixed it. I will look into that. Thank you.
All right, maybe with that, we're at 4 o'clock. So we're gonna go ahead and call it here unless my colleagues see a burning question that we have to get in before we sign off. We're all good. All right, so with that, we will end our webinar. Well, again, we'll get this posted. Everything will be at pbisca.org. Thank you so much for attending. We appreciate you being here. We appreciate the time it takes to apply for recognition and the efforts that you put in to support the social, emotional, behavioral well-being of your students. All right, with that, have a good night.
Thank you.